Manager of Digital Communications and New Media here at the AAF, and I would like to welcome everyone to this edition of the AAF's Faculty Corner webinar series. Today we'll be focusing on what's relevant in teaching media planning, and we'll be getting started in just a moment, but first I just wanted to go over a few technical details. If you didn't catch the chat message that I sent to the audience, if you're having any technical difficulties, if you can't hear, if you can't see, just type that into your chat box, and you can choose to send it to the staff. And either Melissa or myself will see that, and I will get with you and try to help you get that figured out. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and get started in a moment. I wanted to just go over a couple things, and while I'm doing that, hopefully give some of the latecomers time to join us. First of all, this webinar is going to be recorded. A copy of the PowerPoint presentation that Julie's going to be going through, as well as the video portion, will be posted on our website. Now, it's not video as in webcam video, but the PowerPoint presentation, along with the synced audio, will be posted online, and you will have to have been a registered attendee to view that. And it's going to be found at the following web address. It's www.aaf.org/webinars. Again, that's www.aaf.org/webinars. When you go to that page, you're going to see 3 different options, and one of them will be the Faculty Corner webinar series. When you click on that, you're going to see a list of webinars that have happened already. You can click on them as well as this one, and it'll bring you to the GoToMeeting page where you can actually view today's presentation. Additionally, if you wanted to see the PowerPoint slides, you can click on that same page at the top, Archived Presentations, and you'll see basically a list of all of our previous webinars. You can download the PowerPoint slide there, and you can also view the webinar there as well. You'll see a bio of the presenter and all of that. If that's everything, we're going to go ahead and get started, and what I'd like to do is pass this. Actually, you know what? First, I'd like to the question and answer. We're going to have a question and answer session after Julie's finished, and how that's going to work is just as you would send a message to the staff, you would do the same thing to ask a question. And what's going to happen is you will send that question to staff, and Melissa will be reading those aloud to today's presenter. I do see that we do have some people with some technical issues, so I'm going to go ahead and pass things over to Melissa so she can get into her introduction, and I will get with each and every one of you as fast as I can. Melissa?
Thanks, Phil, for handing it over. Today I have the privilege of presenting our key person for today's webinar, and that is Julie Rieger. Julie Rieger led the West Coast for Zenith Optimedia prior to joining 21st Century Fox as the EVP of Media and Market Planning. While at Zenith Optimedia, she was running HP in 96 countries and 20th Century Fox in the United States. She began her career in the heart of Texas at Vogel Dallas for around 16 years. And then in 2007, Julie was named one of Advertising Age's Women to Watch. Julie graduated from Southern Methodist University in Dallas with a degree in advertising. And if she's not doing advertising, she's golfing. So that's her second love. She was a scholarship athlete at the University of Oklahoma her first 2 years of college. And prior to OU, she was the youngest ever to win the Oklahoma Girls Junior Championship at the age of 13. And then also with Julie today is Tina Konen and Lori Dicker. Tina is the EVP, or Managing Director of Zenith West. She manages Zenith Media's West Coast offices and oversees all West Coast-based accounts, including her most favorite account, 21st Century Fox. With over 18 years in media and advertising, there's almost no advertising category that Tina hasn't touched in some way. With experience in telecommunications, technology, consumer electronics, automotive, packaged goods, retail, fashion, and entertainment. In addition to Zenith, Tina has also worked with media company Universal McCann as well as full-service agencies Foote, Conan Belding, Mojo Partners in New Zealand, and Goodby Silverstein and Partners. Lastly, Lori Dicker. She's the SVP in Digital and Social Media Innovation. Lori is the West Coast Digital Director for Moxie Interactive and an expert in digital media, social marketing, and media and content distribution. One of the first to delve into the world of social prior to joining Moxie, Lori founded and served as CEO of a social marketing agency called Karma Media Labs, with clients spanning the entertainment, fashion, and travel categories. During her 15-plus years in advertising, she has also worked with social media agency Sandscape and full-service digital agency Organic. So without further ado, I hand it to Julie.
Hi, everybody. That's a lot of introductions. I am just going to briefly say a couple things before we get started. First of all, I hope everybody can see the screen. Melissa, can everybody see the screen?
You're good, Julie. Everybody's good.
Excellent. So just really quickly, I used to be more of a generalist in the industry, and since working in entertainment, I no longer am. I'm focused much more on the movie and the home entertainment business, and that's why I brought who I thought were some of the best people I've ever done business to help. And I know that you all wanted to know much more about the social media and the digital media aspect, and Lori, frankly, is one of the best I really ever have worked with. So she has joined us today, and then Tina, who's one of the most strategic people I've ever met, is also here as well. And what we've done is we've broken this out into two sections. And the first section is what we're calling the media landscape. And we think this is a really important area to focus on when you're talking to newcomers into the industry, because it really helps understand the demographics and how they've shifted, the trends and how drastically they've shifted, what the behaviors are of all the different groups that are out there. And then the last part that we have is something that Tina actually has created, and it's called fact planning. And it's really more of a blueprint for people to use as they go through the media planning process. So we're a little worried that we don't have enough time to go through everything, but we do believe that the second part, hopefully we'll get through it, but we believe the second part is something that can be, that you guys can use without really a lot of explanation from us, because it's written in a way, in a question fashion that your students can use and I think easily teach them. So with that, I will get started and hopefully not mess this up, because this is my first webinar. It's not my first rodeo, but it's my first webinar. So hopefully, so far so good. We thought it would be really interesting to start with the population shifts that have happened over the last decade, because I don't know if there's any other group, well, maybe there are a few groups outside of us geeky media people that were more excited to see what all the changes that have happened in the last decade across the country. And a few things that have happened that are really interesting, things that are expected, but still interesting nonetheless. One thing that has happened is that the population growth has increased by 12% over the last 10 years, which is less than what people have predicted. Probably close to about half in terms of the growth that a lot of the experts thought that there would be 10 years ago. So we've almost hit that 300 million, and we've seen that the gender kind of stay the same. We see the male share has grown slightly, but we'll just call that a rounding error because it's so small. But when we come to ages, this is what is really fascinating. There are three, in terms of the way that these have been broken out, there's only three groups that have had any growth. And that is the 18 to 24-year-olds, so those are your people. And then we see the 50 to 64, and then the 65 plus. And every place else, we've seen a decline. And it is concerning yet interesting, and it also can define and explain a lot of what's happening really when you start looking at the trends that we'll get into in just a minute. I mean, you'll see that like the average age for a lot of primetime television is actually has increased, and that's because our population has gotten older. You'll see that the use of technology and even consuming entertainment has gotten younger, because you see a little shift in that 18 to 24-year-old. So we think there's some interesting things that you'll find in this. The other things that we've seen from an ethnicity standpoint, which this is certainly what's expected, is that the greatest growth that we've seen is, in terms of sheer numbers, has been the Hispanic population. And I'll tell you, our friends over at Univision could not wait for this data to come out. They were very excited about this, actually, and the Telemundo folks. I think they'll sell a lot more TV ads with this data. But it increased its share actually from 12.5% to 15% of the total population. So that means it had 20% growth. But what's even more interesting, and even though it doesn't represent the largest group, is that the Asian population actually saw a 22% growth. So that was, I think, one of those things that was a little unexpected. And what we have found in our business is that they are the hardest ones to target separately. In fact, even Hispanics to a certain degree, where there was a day when there were more kind of first generation and more Spanish-dominant Hispanic families, where from an advertising perspective, we reached them really through Spanish language media, whether it was television, radio, print. But now that we're getting into more second, third, fourth generation, and there's a lot more, actually more English-speaking Hispanic households, that we are finding it harder to even target them as closely as we used to. We can get Spanish dominant, but it's hard to get more of the English speaking. And the same goes, actually even more so with Asian, is that it's nearly impossible to target them separately, because you're seeing that what's happening in media is they're becoming much more, everybody's more mainstream. It has nothing to do with their ethnicity is really what it comes down to. We see language as Hispanic, but that's about it. We see from a geographic standpoint that there's been a little movement, but it's fairly minimal. And the movement that we think that we've seen that has been south and west in our country is explained more from where the population growth is coming from. So we see that, and we kind of just made this term up about 15 minutes ago, but we're calling it like the ethnic band. We just made that up, so you guys can use that. It is not trademarked by us. But we see this kind of ethnic band through the west and through the south, and that's where we see these large population growth through Hispanic and the Asian population. So we think that's where that's coming from. So on the next slide, so that was our census section, just so everybody can have a good handle on what's happening in the last 10 years and where people, what our population looks like. But now what we're going to talk about is that this next slide is just a top line of how our media world has been changing. And so these are a little more fact-driven, and then behind all of these slides we dive deeper into each one. But what we've seen is, up from a year ago, there's more TV households. Every household has, well, the average household has an average of 138 channels, which is up from 120 just a year ago. And the average number of TVs in a household went from 2.7 to 2.9. And I hope everybody on the other end of this phone is just as frightened as we are, because that is an awful lot of choices. That's an awful lot of ways that we have to figure out how to reach people. But we're going to talk about in a second about actually how much they're consuming. HD penetration has increased 36% this year. It's now over 60. But what's interesting is that not all those people are actually watching it in HD. They have the technology, and that's what also we'll talk about, is that just because people have the technology doesn't mean that they're actually using it, but it's there and it's available. And once it gets to a certain point, we will see the usage increase. But just not quite yet, which gets to the next point about DVRs. DVRs, I don't know if you guys have been following any of the lawsuits that TiVo has had, but it's really interesting. But the DVR category has now actually reached 40%. So when this was done just 2 months ago, this data, it actually has increased another percentage point. So DVR penetration is now at 40. We expect it to hit 50 by the end of 2012. It could even be sooner than that. And one of the reasons that DVR penetration is so important to our business for any category, whether it's entertainment, whether it's fast food, whether it's retail, is most companies have time-sensitive messages. And when we start seeing technologies that are allowing people to watch whenever they want, and frankly wherever they want, it's really hard to get time-sensitive messages out to them when we want them to see them. So I think that is one of the themes that we think is really important. No matter what industry any of your students want to get into, odds are they're going to be getting into an industry that has a time-sensitive message, because everybody, our job is to sell things. And a lot of our things can have expiration dates. So for us in movies, if we don't open it that first weekend, it has not totally expired, but there is something new and fresher that's coming out that next Friday. And the same goes for if Taco Bell is having a 39-cent taco sale. I don't even know if they really do that anymore. I just made that up. But or if Macy's is having their 3-day sale, which I do know they still do that. But all of these things have these time-sensitive deadlines, and it's just, I think, critical for people to understand with whatever they're doing with media is that how to figure out to get that in front of their audience in the manner in which they can make a difference to the business. So I will step off my time-sensitive soapbox and go on to satellite penetration. And satellite, I don't know if anybody out there has it, but that is direct and dish, and that has now hit 30%, and that's 11% increase. That is an astonishing number, especially back in the day when we all thought cable TV was a big deal. We're now seeing, and there's other methods that people are being delivered television as well, but satellite being one of the most, the newest non-traditional that has hit, quite a large number at this point. So 30% is really big. We also know on the next point is that the internet can be accessed by, 90-plus million people, households. 33% of these users are actually watching full-length TV shows at least once a month, and we'll get into that in a second. Smartphone penetration, greatest gadget known to mankind, has grown 67%. And then another little interesting fact that we've seen, and haven't seen it used or seen really any data in terms of any advertising and what it can or can't do, but 3 million 3D TVs have been shipped. And I think everybody's aware of the iPad sales that have reached 8.5 million, or will be reached 8.5 million by year's end. And iPhones are at 50 million. So there's a lot of numbers being thrown around here, but all of these are really important in a lot of different ways. And the first thing that we're going to quickly talk about is there is a show every January called the Consumer Electronics Show, CES, and it's in Vegas. So those that go never sleep. And the thing that people thought would be the big thing talked about were the 3D TVs, but it actually wasn't. It was tablets, like the iPads and Samsungs and the BlackBerry, and everybody who has a tablet, and HP has a tablet product these days. It was the tablet products as well as the internet-capable TVs. We think that the internet-capable TVs are going to have a growth that really no one can predict at this point. They're currently owned by about 16.5 million people, but only 2% of them use them really to watch movies and TV shows. So there's probably a lot of Facebooking going on 60-inch television these days. So that just reminds you to put a good picture up there. Tablet computers that are owned by about 10 million people is expected to jump to 24 million by the end of this year and 40 million by 2012. And if you guys have watched any TV recently, all you do is see tablet ads. And at CES, there were 80 products that were premiered at CES to challenge the iPad. So this is such a hot category. It is a category that will, and already has started to dominate a lot of ad dollars, but will be dominating more and more, I think, daily. I don't even think monthly or yearly, but I think daily. And that's when you hear about, we have jokes now about, oh, you can make an app for that, because pretty much you can. And that all started, obviously, with Apple. And app is the it word, really, and the it thing to try to create and try to figure out a way to market to our consumers. The other technology, just really briefly, is the Apple TV, Roku, and the Kinect. And Kinect actually sold 8 million units its first 2 months, which is pretty astonishing. But even as we see a lot of the technology advancing, particularly computer or handheld, we still see a lot of television being consumed. There must be, if we now have an average of 138 channels in somebody's household, that somebody has to be watching something. And what we found is that just in the last year, people are watching TV an average of a little over 2 hours more a month than they did. We also see that time shifting accounts for about 50% of that growth. So that time shifting is happening from people with DVRs. But we also know that the traditional TV method, which is sitting in front of the television, it's funny that we call traditional, meaning just sitting in front of it when it's actually airing live, it still accounts for about 90% of the way that people watch TV. But that number is going to change, and it's going to change so fast. And again, all these numbers that we're sharing with you and all these trends, that's pretty much what they have been for the last month-ish, but we will be seeing these shifts. There's also a small audience that we can't reach on TV that are only watching shows online. And we see that of the 7%, that 87% of them are 12 to 34. And you break that even further, over half are within that 18 to 24. And it was really interesting. I guest lecture at USC and actually will be taking on and teaching a class in the fall as an adjunct professor for entertainment marketing. And I was there just a few weeks ago, and I was sharing with them a lot of this information and asked everybody in the room, tell me, raise your hand who watches TV online. And every hand went up. And then I said, well, who actually watches it on a TV? And maybe half of the hands went up. And then I said, okay, well, I'm going to guess based on what the last thing I saw is that you're going to tell me that the other half are people who only watch online. And they said yes. And so I asked them to go around the room and to tell me why. And it was an interesting answer. And it wasn't because they hate TV or they don't want to watch the television set. They can't afford cable. So we're seeing a choice by this age group, this 18 to 24, if not even the 18 to 34, that are choosing to pay their monthly internet subscription rate instead of paying for cable. And I think that's another trend that we're going to be seeing, especially if we stick in this kind of depression that we've been in. That people are going to start giving up their cable, and because they can get it all on their computer now, and having internet access is much more important in their overall life than having cable TV. So some other data points that we have, that, by the way, I think is one of the most interesting things that we have in here, and fascinating, and again, another number that we're going to see change over time. We're also seeing that most people are watching their TV, if it's not on a TV set itself, it's on a computer or laptop. There are, there's mobile, there's iPod, iPad is accounting for, just below 10%. There's still some that's happening, probably more iPad than anything, but we are seeing some mobile TV that's happening, and again, another thing that we think we're going to see as well. The other thing that we're seeing in the TV world is that we always talk about available GRPs, and we always talk about supply and demand, and we're getting ready to go into the TV upfront within probably minutes because we think this is a year actually that the upfront may move before the actual TV upfront week because the demand is so high, and with the NFL in the lockout, that there's a lot of very scared advertisers out there because that takes a lot of GRPs out of the marketplace. But that aside, what we've seen happen over time is that the broadcast primetime share of GRPs is shrinking. So what that means is there's more people watching cable TV than primetime TV. And we certainly know that wasn't the case 10 years ago, and it sure the heck wasn't the case 20 years ago. But we see broadcast network diminishing. We used to see ratings. We used to see that we could reach 40 million people in a Friends episode, and now the biggest thing we have on television outside the football season is American Idol, where on a good night you're reaching 22 million, and that's on a really good night. It's in a good night. Well, back in the old days when Paula Abdul would probably pass out on the table, but now it's a good night when Steven Tyler does something, witty, I guess. But we just, we see shows that remain on air that reach, 5-6 million people, where before those shows would never even made it on air. But they keep them and they renew them because broadcast television is losing viewers to cable. And we see this trend that just happened in the course of a year where they lost like 1.5 points, about a little over 2 percentage points. So that's a significant loss in just the course of a year. So the guys at the primetime at the broadcast networks have got to figure out how to get that share back. And we actually see, I guess, a few efforts being made. And I say this not because News Corp is the holding company for 20th Century Fox Films, but they're actually coming out with a show in the fall called X Factor, which is being transported over from the UK. And in the UK, the show has actually done 50 share. So we'll see if Simon Cowell can be the magic bullet to help save the fall lineup for Fox. But everybody else has to do their show to try to get their prime time back. But so far, it's not working for folks as well as they probably want it to. When and what we watch continues to change, and this is what I think is a really interesting way to look at the daily TV viewing patterns of broadcast. And what we're seeing is there are certain days where there's more time shifting happening. And before I mentioned how important the DVR was to the media industry, and this will explain why it's so important. And I'll explain is that if you look if you see Monday and you look across in that darker blue, shows up as 69%. That is the percent of people who are watching television live. And then 13% is same day. So that means that I could record something at 8, but I could watch it at 10. And then 14% is the 1 to 3 days, and then the 4% number is the 4 to 7 days. But what we see from this is Thursdays, there's fewer people watching live television. And then we see Saturday, there's actually more, but Saturday is such a weird day for primetime because it's all repeats in such a small universe that we kind of discount Saturday. But Sunday is pretty interesting, meaning 78%. And we spent a lot of time talking about Sunday and why Sunday gets such better live viewership than the other days do. And then we even started looking at what some other advertisers were doing. And what our hypothesis on Sunday is it's because it actually is a day where people don't feel like they have to pick up the remote. We think it's a mindset. We think it's a day that you can sit down and lean back and not be in such a hurry. And where we think that that's a Monday and a Thursday where we see that those are much more active days for people. I mean, obviously even Wednesday too. And then we saw that Audi, that their strategy in the fall, excuse me, was just to run on Sundays only. They had a Sunday-only television strategy because they felt that with their key audience and with the television behavior that they saw, that they only needed to advertise on Sunday. And that idea probably came from a media person. And so that's why a lot of this data is so important, is that you take a look at this and you start looking at how people consume and what they consume and where's your target and the trends and the technology and trying to figure out a different strategy to really stand out and to be effective for whatever product you're trying to sell, and also efficient, because what's happening, I'm getting a little bit off the reservation here, but what's happening from an efficiency standpoint is what we're going to see in the next year is we're going to see our cost per points in television. We're going to see our cost online. Television we're going to see increase between probably 10 and 15%, and I would say online increases would be at least 20. So as far as I know, there is no industry out there that can actually handle these types of cost increases. And so that's going to be forcing people that do what I do, and Lori and Tina in the room, to figure out more effective ways. And if you can't be more effective, you have to be more efficient, because nobody's budgets are going to be increasing 10 to 20% in the next year. It's not going to happen. But the market is forcing our part of the industry to be much more creative, much more clever, and really finding these little pockets like what Audi did with Sunday, of a way to be really effective. And from what I understand, they hit their goals just fine, just by advertising on that one day.
Julie?
So,
Julie?
Yes, I'm sorry.
I have a quick question from the audience. You used the terminology TV up front. What is that? Could you define that for the audience?
Oh, I can. I'm sorry. I just made an assumption everybody knows what I know. And odds are you guys know a lot more. So the TV upfront is the one time a year that all the buyers and sellers get together, and about 70% of the broadcast time is bought up front. So it's bought in advance. So what we do is we go in May, and then we spend the next 2 or 3 months fighting, bickering, clause come out, all the things that happen during a negotiation for all of the TV inventory that we want for the next broadcast year. And the broadcast year starts in September and goes through that, or actually October, and goes through the following September. So this is where we go in and negotiate, how much we'll pay, and for how many, like, Modern Families, which is a very hot commodity. Everybody wants to run in Modern Family. Everybody wants to run in American Idol. A lot of people want 30 Rock, and believe me, advertisers want Glee. And so it is a knockdown, drag out to negotiate not just what you pay, but how many that you can actually advertise in. Because when it comes time for that particular show to air, odds are 90%, if not 100% of that inventory has been sold for 6 months. So anybody who wants to get in it likely can't. Because what happens with that other 20%, if not 30%, of the inventory that the sellers like the CBS, the ABC, NBC, Fox, TNT, TBS, ESPN, so all the cable and broadcast, all the inventory they hold back from the upfront market, they start releasing it in that quarter, and it's called the scatter market. And within the scatter market, they can command increases from as little as 10% up to 40, if not, we've seen double. So if somebody's paying, I'm going to make up these numbers because I do know what they are, but I'm going to make up numbers. Say if somebody's paying $700,000 for a spot in American Idol, and they bought it in the upfront, but somebody wants to get in it, and there's inventory available 2 days before, odds are they're going to be paying over $1 million for it because they didn't buy it early. So it's somewhat of like a commodity where you buy it early and you bank on the fact that you will pay less because you bought it early than what the scatter market would be. So that person who asked the question, did that kind of answer it? I'm going to take the silence as a yes. So what I'm going to do is, Lori, who knows more about digital than I could ever dream of, she's going to take you through the next few slides that really dive into, I think, what you guys were most interested in, which is about the overall digital trends and all the social marketing and media.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about digital from an advertising standpoint. There are becoming many more opportunities to engage with audiences online, and the choices are becoming much more fragmented. So to just talk a little bit about the usage right now, as Julie had mentioned, right now there's 85 to 90 million U.S. households online. Internet usage overall, and again, some of these numbers change probably on a daily basis. So, every time you kind of close your eyes and turn around, the numbers change and only increase. But right now, we've seen a growth of about 3% from last year. The average user is online 76 minutes a day. So if you sort of take into account, people who are maybe less savvy online to those who are probably on Facebook a good amount of the day, 76 minutes is still a pretty lengthy period of time as an average. And again, we're sort of looking at adults 18 to 24. Not surprising, are spending, most of that time, 83 minutes a day. Penetration right now is at 91% of users. So again, if you sort of think about this as a platform to engage and reach audiences, it's a very strong and compelling way to make sure that the message is heard. Just taking a look again at some of the top properties, and there's so many different properties out there. From a mainstream standpoint, looking at sites like Yahoo, Google, Facebook, MSN, and AOL, we're looking at those as sort of the top 5 mainstream online destinations still. We like to call those portals. People go there for all kinds of information. I think the important thing to point out, though, is a lot of people who have special interests are going to much more niche and targeted sites as well. So if you think of those people who love fashion or love travel or love music, there are a lot of different destinations out there today where advertisers are getting their messaging out there to connect with those niche and targeted audiences. Again, we're going to talk a little bit about Facebook on the next slide, but again, just taking a look at its growth since last year, it's up 38%, and currently, I actually heard that we're about 80%, so this is 73%. The last I saw was 80% of all users. So if you think of it as a communication platform, you're really reaching a very wide and large audience on Facebook. Facebook users are spending an average of 25 minutes a day, or nearly a third of all online time. So again, thinking of those different audiences, whether they be at work or at school. And again, we'll dig into this a little bit deeper in terms of where people are actually engaging with Facebook. And just to mention a few other properties to keep in mind, Vivo, which for those who are not familiar with Vivo, it's actually a for those like myself who grew up with MTV music videos, if you're a music video junkie like myself, it's becoming a very prominent destination for people to view online video. Pandora is more of an audio experience, but very popular way for people to listen and explore new music and bands. Zynga, social gaming, is becoming, if anybody here is familiar with Farmville, it's got a tremendous audience, and advertisers are actually getting their messages integrated with the gaming experience. Rio, as an example, was one of those advertisers, and we saw a tremendous amount of activity from integrating Rio into Farmville. Twitter, we're going to talk about it in a moment, but again, I think the interesting thing to think about, and we're just looking at properties, is a lot of these are more sort of mainstream types of portals and publishers. But then we're also looking at Facebook and Twitter, which are two mainly social media platforms, where really the message is driven by people and not as much by advertisers. So we'll talk about that in a moment. I want to talk a little bit about online video, and Julie had sort of talked a little bit about how people are consuming entertainment content. I think the thing that's interesting about online video is the lines are almost starting to become a little blurry in terms of what is professional content versus what is user-generated content. We've actually seen quite a few personalities who actually have become celebrities in their own right because of their following on YouTube. So people are actually consuming video in a lot of different places, whether it be on YouTube or whether it be on different sites like Hulu, where they can watch episodic programming, or abc.com. There are a lot of different types of destinations where people can consume media, and it can even range from short and long form. 33% of video is long form episodic content. And again, right now it's reaching about 91% of users, and people are averaging, this is an average, of 14 hours per month. And again, this can be on platforms from someone's PC to their iPad to their iPhone. There are a lot of different platforms that one can consume the media, so we're seeing a huge growth there. And again, 18 to 24 is really sort of driving that growth at 22 hours a month. From a application-based marketing, just to speak a little bit to what's happening in mobile advertising, and I know there's another slide to talk about this, but there are a lot of new opportunities to advertise on the iPhone or the iPad experience. A lot of the tablet-based advertising opportunities are becoming much more rich, engaging. We're seeing a lot of things like pre-roll, video. We're seeing rich media advertising where people can actually engage with an ad on their phone or on their tablet, and it almost brings up an application or another sort of engagement opportunity. So we'll continue to see that growing. If we go to the next slide, just to kind of talk a little bit about social media. You know, there's sort of this new phrase that's been coined. There's paid media, which is, you know, more on the advertising side, and then what people are calling sort of earned media, which is social media. And again, the way that I like to kind of characterize social media is it's really sort of people sharing with people in dialogue. And from an advertising or marketing standpoint, the thing that's important to keep in mind is how you get your message in front of audiences where they're likely to get excited, get passionate, become engaged, and then ultimately share with one another. And sort of the whole underlying foundation is spreading word of mouth. And so just to kind of speak a little bit, and we'll talk a bit about Facebook and Twitter here, but right now we've got about 140 million people engaging in social media. Again, I think a lot of times people look at social media as being only Facebook and Twitter, which is not necessarily true. I think those are two social networks that are very much driving a very large amount of conversation. But if you really think about where people are sharing with one another, if you're looking at other categories like travel, for example, a lot of times when people are looking, they're planning their trips, they're going to Australia, they want to know where to stay, they'll go to sites like TripAdvisor, or they'll go to other places where there are user reviews, and a lot of times they'll be much more compelled to make their plans, or it will influence their decisions because other people who have similar interests have shared their experience, good, bad, neutral, but it really does help inform. And a lot of times people will trust peer recommendations before they'll trust the corporate message. So that's just one point to kind of point out. Facebook, the reason why that's a really interesting area to kind of focus on is, as I'm sure many of you who are on Facebook see, you know, not only is it a means of having dialogue with your network, your social friends, and even in some cases being able to interact with brands, but it's really about a way of amplifying that word of mouth. And so from an advertising standpoint, I think what's interesting to kind of keep in mind is while Facebook has a lot of media opportunities to kind of get the brand message, in my opinion, it's really about a hybrid approach to not only get your brand message out there, but really kind of helping get people to engage with that brand message, because ultimately the goal is to get people to spread it to their friends. And all of that activity becomes sort of this ripple effect. So if, for example, I'm a brand and I'm posting great content on my page and people are engaging in that content on my page, more people are likely to see it. So I think from an advertising standpoint with Facebook and from a marketing strategy, it's really important to kind of keep in mind what are the media opportunities as well as how are you engaging with that audience. From a just from a content standpoint, right now Facebook is almost emerging as one of the prominent photo sharing applications. So right now we're looking at 3 billion photo uploads. It's reaching 73% of all users, and about 23 minutes a day is spent on there. And just to talk a bit about Twitter as well, that's very much a conversation-driven dialogue network. It's reaching about 24 million online users. Again, that number is growing quickly. And in terms of how marketers are using that, there's very creative and innovative ways of getting people to interact with the brand. But typically, from a messaging standpoint, just touting why your product is great is not really effective. So moving on quickly. Oh, I'm sorry. So just to kind of give an example, you know, we've seen a lot of brands actually doing things like promotions or unlocking exclusive content. You know, we saw, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, Audi actually during the Super Bowl ads, they were promoting a hashtag on Twitter to get people talking about one of their new cars. And I think what's important to think about with Twitter is a lot of times there's sort of this misconception that from a brand that it's more important to have a huge number of followers. And that's important, but what's also important is something called a hashtag, which is basically people tagging content. And you want people tagging content about subject matter that's relevant to your brand, because ultimately what that's doing is, as an example, I'll use, you know, sort of a theatrical example, but if I've just gone to see the movie Rio, I might be standing in line and on Twitter and saying, I just saw hashtag Rio the movie. I might not necessarily follow the Rio profile on Twitter, but what I've ultimately done is I've talked about subject matter in hopes that now someone's going to retweet it, and that's actually sort of the phenomenon of Twitter is just as it's important you want to have a follower base, it's equally important to make sure that people are talking about your brand and hopefully keeping an eye. So I think, again, from a strategic standpoint, to sort of understand how successful you are on Twitter, or even thinking about a Twitter strategy, listening to what's being said about your brand and doing searches on specific terms, on hashtag, or even just subject matter. If you're seeing what people are talking about fashion, look under common terms like fashion, brands, shoes, whatever it may be. There's a lot, and the beauty of Twitter is it's all real-time conversation. So it's people talking in the moment. A lot of times, even with the Super Bowl, again, we'll sort of talk about that as an example, but people who multitask like myself, watching the game, watching the commercials, and following things like hashtags that are specific to the ads that are running during the Super Bowl because it's something that interests me, I know that I can actually have an online chat, if you will, on Twitter because I'm following a specific hashtag. So there are a lot of really, I could spend days talking about Twitter, but it's definitely a relevant network to utilize to reach your audience. Just to talk a little bit about, again, just one more thing about Twitter is from a search standpoint, Twitter is actually indexed by Google. So even if people are talking, the more people are talking about your brand, again, just from an organic search standpoint, those results actually show up in Twitter. And right now it's actually driving 600 million search queries a day. So there are actually a lot of people who are going straight to Twitter to do searches because they want to know not necessarily what corporate or brand pages might show up, but they want to know what people are saying, which is really what all that dialogue is about. Just to talk again a little bit about social gaming, the social engagements are really becoming a new and innovative way for brand marketers to get their message out there. Cityville, for example, has 84 million users. It's interesting to see some of the growth that's taking place in not just with the casual gaming, but Farmville as an example, Mafia Wars, and groups like Zynga, for that very reason, are actually going to advertisers and finding new and innovative ways of integrating the brand message, not just about surrounding the game experience, but actually integrating it within the game.
Tina?
Lori.
Oh, it's Lori. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's fine. Or Lori, could you please re-explain what a hashtag is to the audience?
Absolutely. So just to go back to Twitter, Twitter has a 140-character limit, and within that, the culture of Twitter really is when people are sort of putting their bite-sized comments or status updates, they put what looks like a pound sign, what they call as a hashtag, and that basically will tag a term or a piece of content. It has to be one word. And the reason people do that is because in a lot of ways it actually curates content or categorizes content around a certain term. And you see people doing this to be funny, like, oh my God, or, things like that. But you also see, like, for me, I'll use myself as an example, a big social media geek. And on a daily basis, I'm actually looking on Twitter and I'm searching what people are saying about social media because I want to know, what's happening and what new great campaigns are emerging. And I actually look at the Twitter hashtag, # social media, all one word, and then when you pull it up, it basically organizes your search results. But anybody who has posted anything and tagged what they've written with a hashtag, it will actually pull up a stream of content that's all tagged. So it's really about tagging your content and curating it, if you will. So if any of you go on Twitter and you see, people, sometimes if someone writes something about Facebook or iPhone or NFL or, even around people's names, it's really a way of kind of navigating through all of this dialogue that takes place on Twitter to kind of really sort of narrow it down on certain and specific content. So I hope that kind of answers the question. I'll take that as a yes. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about Twitter. Again, just from a volume standpoint, we're looking at about 900,000 tweets sent per day. And again, these numbers are probably not as accurate because it grows and grows. But there are over 160 million Twitter accounts worldwide. And I think what's kind of interesting to note, too, is that there is a huge, outside of the U.S., it is available in other countries and other languages, and we're seeing a huge growth there as well. I just want to spend, I know time is a little bit short, but I wanted to talk a little bit about social influence marketing. So again, the whole idea with social media is it's really about people sharing with people. And when you're an advertiser and you want to sort of tap into that and leverage it, the way I like to sort of say it is it's sort of like you're inviting yourself to someone's party and you want to be a good guest. And so when people are actually having conversation with one another, you don't want to disrupt that conversation and you don't want to hit them over the head with the brand message. You want to make sure that you're getting your message in front of them in a way that's authentic and that they can trust. So that kind of sort of lends itself to what I call sort of social influence marketing. Others call it as well. Whereas a marketer, if you take a look at different verticals, so let's say it's a fashion brand or it's retail or it's financial services or travel, whatever it may be, there are what we call influencers out there, and they could be editors, they could be bloggers, they could actually be somebody on YouTube who has a huge following. And as an example, there are these YouTube celebrities called the Haul Girls, H-A-U-L. They just did these little video vignettes of them going shopping to TJ Maxx and Marshalls or wherever they went, and they just take these little videos of themselves, like showing what they got, and they try it on and they talk about it. They've actually become a really great marketing vehicle because a lot of brands have actually, or even just properties, brands, whatever you name it, have actually utilized these online celebrities, if you will, to actually help evangelize their message. If you think about bloggers, for example, I'll use an entertainment blogger, Perez Hilton, as an example. Some people love him, a lot of people hate him, but you can't really disagree with the fact that he definitely is an influencer. So, when you look at sort of what your blogger outreach strategy might be, it's not necessarily sending a bunch of press releases to bloggers. It's more of a going to them, incentivizing them to basically contextualize something about your brand and get their readers interested and engaged. There are a lot of different ways of doing that. Some ways are much more organic, where if you have a blogger outreach program, you can get those people to do that. Then there's some types of programs like Clout, for example. Clout is, they basically score people's influence on Twitter. We've actually seen quite a few brands starting to work with them. I think the jury's still out a little bit on the best way to do it, but really, for example, Virgin America did a campaign with Clout where Clout identified the top travel enthusiasts, and they wanted people to talk about a flight that went from San Francisco to Toronto, I believe, and they actually invited 100 of the top travel influencers on Twitter to actually take the flight, and they gave them free Wi-Fi in flight, and the hope was they were going to talk about how great this experience was. So again, it's sort of tapping into those influencers and kind of putting the marketing message in their hands. And just one other thing to note is other programs, mommy bloggers, hugely, hugely influential to get some of the more prominent mommy blogs to talk about a product they love, actually really engages and strikes a chord with their audiences. And there are also social programs like Social Moms that actually has a network of thousands of prominent moms in the blogging community, and they actually do programs with them to get them to talk and evangelize about products. So there are very interesting, clever ways that advertisers can tap into that.
Hey, Melissa, are we out of time?
We could probably go for another 15 minutes.
Okay.
I'll wrap it up quick.
No, great.
Okay, so just moving on to the next, just to kind of focus a little bit on mobile. So a lot of, what we've talked about is online media, and again, not to make it only about something that one accesses on their computer versus mobile versus tablet, but just to talk a little bit about where we are with mobile. Right now, 80% of the U.S. population owns a mobile phone. The smartphones are really, there's huge growth there. Again, there's been some debate over what percentage by the end of the year will be users with smartphones. Right now it's about 50%. And then, just the mobile internet usage has jumped over 600%, which is tremendous. And again, I think it's mostly because you're seeing both on Android and iPhone and other devices that people are experiencing and consuming content on their mobile devices just as much in some ways as they are online. And again, just to kind of take a look at the chart to the right and just sort of show you some of the growth. I think what's notable here between Apple and Android and then RIM, which is BlackBerry, right now, it's sort of projected that by 2012 that we're actually going to see Android slightly have a larger percentage over Apple. And then just one other thing to kind of take note of, what are people doing on their mobile devices? So just in terms of sort of proliferation of mobile applications, thinking about what categories, I think the first one, just to kind of, again, touch on social networking, seeing that it's kind of the prominent, it's 240% change between last year and this year, or I'm sorry, 2009 to 2010. But it's really accounting for Facebook and Twitter. One thing that I also want to talk about, and I don't know if it's in this bucket or not, but just in terms of location-based applications, I think some people are kind of calling those social networking applications. You're looking at things like Foursquare. There's photo sharing applications like Instagram. And we're even seeing some new types of applications where people can check into entertainment, like GetGlue and Into Now. But again, a lot of these types of applications are starting to kind of meld together in terms of becoming not just a location, but almost a social networking platform, sharing photos, tagging them with a location, and actually commenting on it and hashtagging it. So it's almost in some ways these standalone applications, because they are integrated with Facebook and Twitter, are becoming social networking. Like Angry Birds Rio, exactly. So that's pretty much my first.
All right, folks, it's Julie again. So I am going to try to wrap this up pretty quickly. We wanted to make sure that we hit on other media types as well. And in our industry, there's been a lot of talk about, is radio dead, are magazines dead, is newspaper dead? There are some that are actually have their stride is just fine. There are some that are limping along, and others, like newspaper, are struggling. So some of this is a little bit on the optimistic side, but just, from a radio standpoint, people are still listening to the radio. And I think one of the reasons advertisers still really like radio is because it is something that they can get that urgent message across. Clearly, it doesn't have the visual aspect of it, but it does allow, if there's time-sensitive messaging. In fact, we in the movie business, we're starting to use it a bit more than we had in the past for that very reason. And if you listen to the radio much, I'm assuming since you all are highly educated, highly intelligent people, you listen to NPR. But if you listen to one of your local, just typical classic rock country stations, you'll hear a lot of car ads, you'll hear a lot of things on sale, and so forth. I'm going to keep moving. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to go back for 1 second. What we are seeing is the internet radio is seeing these great levels of intent, and what we're seeing are, like Lori mentioned, Pandora. Pandora is a site where it creates playlists for you based on the different artists and types of music that you like. And it is one of the, probably the most popular, I think, or fair to say, internet radio sites. So magazines. Magazines, from a consumer standpoint, are really dropping, but what's helping magazines is that most of the magazine business really is business to business. We have seen, more niche titles be introduced, and this, I think it was Q2 of 2010, is showing the first positive growth of ad revenue. So magazines have definitely been limping along, and there was a day, probably about 15 years ago, when CompuServe was out and Mosaic, like the beginning of the internet, and we would joke, oh, nothing can replace magazines, unless you can take it into the bathroom. And then was born the iPad. And so you could take a magazine into the bathroom with you. And so we think that magazines are still going to be struggling along. And we have seen circulation drop there as well. Newspaper, that is a medium that there will be a day. I do believe that it will not be as alive. I don't want to say it will be dead, but it will not be as alive. In fact, it was the publisher of the New York Times actually said that in 5 years that he actually thinks they won't even be printing the paper. Now, whether he was doing that for some other, I don't know why he would say that, but if there was some other intent that he had, but that's what he said in a press release one day. Outdoor is making a comeback. We're seeing it used a lot more. We're seeing a lot of really great locations being torn down and digital outdoor being put in. What we're also seeing are a lot of these place-based broadcast networks. So gas station TV, we see it in Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf. We see them in Walmart. We see them in malls. I mean, we see all these networks. And I think for us, the jury is really out on those because, we believe we have trouble having people watch television. They're actually sitting in their own living room, much less if they're, buying a cup of coffee if they're shopping. So much less getting gas. So we do believe that there's a lot of proving has to be done on the part of these networks to actually show that they can actually shift consumer perception of brands. We're seeing them also, by the way, like in Taco Bell and Denny's. One day, just go look around and look at all the TV sets that have absolutely taken over your life. So I think we'll end on this, and which is what we thought would happen. And this media planning process will be available to everybody. And I believe that Melissa has my contact information on there. So if you have questions, you're more than welcome to ask about this media planning process or obviously anything else that we've talked about, because we've hit an awful lot of territory in a really brief time. And
Julie, I've added a contact slide at the very end of this presentation, which will be downloadable from our website afterwards with your email address.
Great. So I think we're ready for questions if anybody has any.
Julie, I've got 2 questions from the audience. One is from David Kington. He's asking, why are you forecasting 10 to 15% TV and 15 to 20% online CPRP increases given the increase in fragmentation?
It's all demand-based. It's, the 15 to 20% increases we'll see from a digital standpoint, it's because of demands from the top sites like a Facebook, a Yahoo. For us, like we see the movie ticketing sites, everybody wants it. And so when everybody wants something, they can jack the prices up. I mean, it is a supply and demand business that we're in. The same with television. With television, there's a lot of companies that are predicting or hoping maybe that the recession will at least partially end. And that business will pick back up, and they want to make sure that they have the advertising inventory to sell their goods. And then we also, because we also see a lot of pricing is driven by top-performing programs or properties. So, a Facebook can really lead the way for second or even third-tier websites, because if you can't get Facebook, what you want, you go get the next best thing you can find. That's probably not the best example, but like a Yahoo to an MSN, something like that. And on television, a show like Modern Family can set the pricing for ABC. And what they can do is they say, in order for you to get Modern Family, you have to pay a 15% increase, but also, for Grey's Anatomy, which their ratings are dropping, we still are going to demand that you pay that for that show as well. So, and then we also see from a television perspective, which I think I mentioned before, is the fear of an NFL lockout, because there are 3 to 4 times on Sundays, and then there's Monday Night Football, where those are, I don't know how many GRPs a week that is. that we'd be losing, but we'd be losing a good, in a course of a day, 100 million viewers, and some of those can be duplicated, but that watch football. And that's a lot of eyeballs that would be lost in a marketplace, even if the NFL is actually delayed. You're still losing a few games, which is taking GRPs out of the marketplace. Yeah, and then of those GRPs lost, Tina just informed me, and she's right, that only half of those can be replaced. So that means people watching other things on television, because the other half are like, well, I'm not going to watch TV at all.
Okay, great.
And your second question?
Oh, yep, we have a few more. This individual asked, where does LinkedIn rank in the list of social media sites used?
I would say, I think LinkedIn, definitely a prominent social networking. I think their advertising product is not as mature for a lot of brands. I think that majority of advertisers are actually utilizing LinkedIn as a means to recruit or to get people to kind of follow their company. So I think from a usage standpoint, it's definitely a predominant social network that many people are on. I think from a marketing and advertising standpoint, they're still in a very young place in terms of really creating the right inventory, the right opportunity for advertisers to connect with their users.
Okay, great. The next two questions, I want to make sure we squeeze those in with our little time that's remaining. This pertains to the media planning process. How widely used is the fact planning approach within the media planning and buying industry? And then a follow-up question to that is, how does it tie in with the 6-step process you outlined on slides 26 and 27? It's very comparable to how the industry plans. I think that it is like a blueprint. It's like a brief. These are standard questions that need to be answered in order to produce a solid, well thought through media plan. Different companies can call it different things, but in the end, they're still the same questions that have to be asked, and the same research has to be done. The difference of a good media person and a great media person is creativity. Is the person who saw the opportunity for Audi on those Sundays. That was a great media person. A good media person would have said, oh, well, we should do, maybe a little bit of Monday, and let's make sure that we buy a few banners here. And, that is somebody who just covers something off. But a great media person sees, does all the research, all the necessary work, and finds something that no one else has found. And this process can help them get to that place. It doesn't give them the answer, because the answer has to come from them. And the answer has to come from, it has to come from even questions that they have to ask even themselves or their peers. So if you have students and they're building a media plan and they're looking at a digital campaign or even a TV campaign, and they would know that most people that are in their peer group are actually watching their TV online, that they should be doing a pre-roll campaign on Hulu. That would probably help them, or a pre-roll campaign on abc.com, or a pre-roll campaign on, southparkstudios.com or familyguy.com. I mean, they would know those things, but the research would help them with it. So I think it is very common. Great. We're going to finish up with one more question, and then for those who didn't get an opportunity to ask or some last-minute questions arise, again, Julie's email is available on the last slide of this presentation. Julie, when teaching media to undergrad advertising majors, should professors still start with and focus mainly on measurement and tools to teach how to judge effectiveness in any medium, such as arbitration, Nielsen, circulation, etc., or should they be teaching about digital tactics, such as here's where online you can advertise and this is a cool place to do a pre-roll video, etc.?
That is such a great question. That really is. And this is such a lame answer, but it's both. Because I think that students have to understand what the full landscape looks like. So they need to understand, even though newspaper is dying and, magazine circulation is down, they still need to understand it. But they also need to understand, because more now than ever, and I remember this when I was in school, because we did much more of the first part, which was understanding, going through all the Nielsen data, which again is important, or, whether it was MRI or Simmons. But what we didn't talk about was how to really stand out. And the media market has changed so much in the last 20 years since I was in school. God, I feel old. That it's changed so much, where it's so much more important that if you can find a way to stand out and that's the effective part, that is what makes the great media person. And I'm sorry, and Tina's writing me notes across the room, and insight. And so that is trying to find, they have to understand all the tools, but they have to learn, that somehow be taught how to think differently. It's like we've gotten such a bad rap in this part of the industry about being kind of propeller heads and being nerdy, because in the day, that's what we were. We were the number crunchers, and we said, oh, you know what, our audience consumes 42% of their time is spent on television and 24% of their time is spent on newspapers, so let's allocate our budget that way. And that's the way it used to be done. Now, I would rather, if somebody's spending 20 minutes on or somebody's spending half an hour on TV, but what they're watching on TV is South Park, I'm going to go own South Park, and I don't have to run anything else on TV, and then I'll have a great digital campaign. Like those are things that we would have never done 20 years ago, because we weren't taught to think like that. But it is, I think, so much overlaps with the creativity side, and really encouraging students to think that way, because that's what the world is now. Media is creative, and it is gutsy, and it's ballsy, and it's, it's not following a standard format or looking at a plan that somebody did a year ago. The whole marketplace changes, and it's so fragmented that they have to find a way to really stand out. So that's kind of my passion plea, actually, as people who want to hire your students when they graduate, is that I want people who think like that. But I want them to understand the market, but I want them that are thinking and they are looking for really cool opportunities. I think that's the end of my answer. All right. With my passion plea.
Thank you so much, Julie, Tina, and Lori, for today's presentation. This is one of our biggest webinars, so it's a huge success. And again, to the audience, if you have any additional questions, you can contact Julie. If you'd like to contact Lori or Tina, email me at mwong@aaf.org, and then I can pass along their emails to you as well. So again, thank you to our presenters today, and thank you for attending.